All right. Shalom, family. It's your brother Kanaiba coming at you again with part 2 of this series titled, Can We Eat Whatever We Want Now? Unclean versus Clean. Okay, so of course, in part 1, I pretty much went over 1 Timothy chapter 4. Okay, the verses in 1 Timothy chapter 4 that's used to try and justify eating whatever you want, to try and justify, all foods being clean, so to speak. Okay, that's what's said in Christianity. Okay, that's the false doctrine that's pushed. Okay, they, use those specific verses in 1 Timothy chapter 4 to try and justify, what they do, right? And now here in part 2, what I want to do, I want to try and kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Okay, what I want to go over some of the key verses in Mark chapter 7 and Acts chapter 10. Okay, and I'm going to try to do it at the same time, or in the same video rather. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into the scriptures, and again, let's cut this false doctrine. Okay, so this is the book of Mark chapter 7 and verse 14, and it reads, And when he had called all the people unto him, he said unto them, Hearken unto me, every one of you, and understand. Verse 15, There is nothing from without a man that entering into him can defile him, but the things which come out of him, those are they that defile the man. Okay, so now let's focus in on the beginning of verse 15, because that's the part that's actually used within Christianity to try and justify eating whatever you want to eat now. Okay, because it says there is nothing from without a man that entering into him can defile him. Okay, so they'll say that Yahweh Shai is now giving us permission to eat whatever we want to eat. Okay, but now we're going to do something that's rarely done within Christianity. Okay, we're actually going to read this in context. Okay, we're not going to isolate one verse and make a whole doctrine out of it. We're going to read this passage in context. Okay, so let's get to it. So this is the book of Mark chapter 7 and verse 1, and it reads, Then came together unto him the Pharisees and certain of the scribes, which came from Jerusalem. Verse 2, And when they saw some of his disciples eat bread with defiled, that is to say, with unwashen hands, they found fault. Okay, so as we see towards the middle of part 2, this is actually the topic matter, okay, where it says to eat bread with defiled, that is to say, with unwashen hands. It says they found fault. So the Pharisees and the scribes, they saw some of the disciples eating bread without having washed their hands. Okay, that's the topic matter. This has nothing to do with unclean foods. We see clearly what the topic matter is eating bread with unwashed hands. Okay, so here's the problem with that. Okay, we know what the topic matter is, and the only food that's mentioned in this verse is bread. Okay, and when you go into our dietary law, which is Leviticus, the 11th chapter, nowhere in there does it mention that bread is unclean to eat. Okay, so the topic matter is not even dealing with unclean foods. Okay, that's why I said you have to read in context. Okay, you cannot just isolate one verse and then turn around and make a whole doctrine out of it. A false doctrine, might I add. Okay, so now let's jump down to verse 5, and it reads, Then the Pharisees and scribes asked him, Why walk not thy disciples according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashen hands? Okay, so again, this is giving more clarity as to what the topic matter is. Okay, notice the middle of the verse says what? Why walk not thy disciples according to the tradition of the elders? Okay, so the Pharisees and the scribes, they confronted Yahushua about not keeping the tradition of the elders. And that's really what the topic matter is. It's about putting the tradition of men above the commandments of God. Okay, that's all this is talking about. And what is the tradition of men, or the tradition of the elders that's being spoken about in verse 5? It says what? But eat bread with unwashen hands. Okay, that's the tradition of men. Okay, you can't go into the law and show where it says that you have to wash your hands before you eat bread or eat anything else. Okay, that's not a law within Torah. Okay, now it is a good practice to have. Okay, to wash your hands before you eat. That's a good practice, but it's not in the Torah. Okay, it's not a sin to not wash your hands before you eat bread. Okay, that's the topic matter. Putting the tradition of men above the commandments of God. Okay, so now let's jump back down to verse 15. Now that we have that understanding, and let's read this in context. Okay, and it says what? There is nothing from without a man that entering into him can defile him. But the things which come out of him, those are they that defile the man. So now that we know what the topic matter is, now we understand what Yahushua meant when he said there is nothing from without a man that entering into him can defile him. What is he saying? He's pretty much saying that eating anything without washing your hands is not going to defile you. Okay, that's what he's saying. It has nothing to do with unclean foods. He's simply saying if you eat anything before you wash your hands, that's not what's going to really defile you. Okay, but then he goes on to say what? But the things which come out of him, those are they that defile the man. Now, what did Yahushua mean by that? We're going to get into that in just a minute, but I want to look at verse 17 very closely, because that is a key and to what we're going to go into when we deal with Acts chapter 10. Okay, let's look at verse 17 really quick. Okay, this is verse 17, and it reads, And when he was entered into the house from the people, his disciples asked him concerning the parable. Okay, so now we look at the last part of the verse. It says his disciples asked him concerning the parable. Okay, meaning what? His disciples were there when he gave the parable about it not being what enters into you that defiles you, right? So the disciples heard this and they asked him about the meaning behind what he said about that parable, about it not being what's without the man and going in that defiles him. That's not what defiles you, right? So now Yahushua is about to expound on what he meant in that parable. Okay? And keep in mind, this is his disciples that he's explaining the meaning to concerning this parable. Okay? So now let's jump down to verse 20, and it reads, "And he said, that which cometh out of the man, that defileth the man." Now, why is that? Let's look at verse 21. "For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile the man." So the key is what? In verse 21. Okay? Where it says what? Out of the heart of men proceed evil thoughts. Okay? Because remember, originally, what did Yahushua say? He said, it's not that which come from without and goeth in. That's not what defiles the man. It's that which starts from within and cometh out, meaning the opposite way. That's what defiles the man. Why? Because from within proceed evil thoughts. Meaning what? I went over this in past lessons, okay? That what? Sin starts as a thought, okay? It's first conceived as a thought. Then as you think upon it, that thought grows. And then sooner or later, you give birth to that thought, meaning what? Sin is now committed. You actually act on the sin. Okay? But it starts from within, meaning what? It starts in your mind. That's how sin starts. That's the point that Yahushua was making. Okay? You eating food with unwashed hands is not going to defile you. But guess what? Meditating on evil thoughts, that will defile you. Because sooner or later, if you keep meditating on those evil thoughts, you're going to act on them. Okay? And that's going to bring forth sin. And as we know, that sin brings forth death. Okay? So now that we have this understanding about Mark chapter 7. Now, let's move to Acts chapter 10, okay? Because Acts chapter 10, just like Mark chapter 7, is another passage that's used within Christianity to try and justify eating whatever you want to eat now, okay? So now, let's go to Acts chapter 10 and let's deal with that, all right? So this is Acts chapter 10, starting at verse 9, and it reads, "On the morrow, as they went on their journey," and again, we're going to get into who they are in just a minute, okay? We're going to read this in context. But it says, starting over, "On the morrow, as they went on their journey and drew nigh unto the city, Peter went up upon the housetop to pray about the 6th hour." Okay. Verse 10. And it reads, "And he became very hungry and would have eaten, but while they made ready, he fell into a trance." Okay. So it was about the 6th hour and Peter was up on the housetop, sending up prayers. Okay. So he became hungry, and while food was being prepared, he fell into a trance. All right. Now this is verse 11, and it reads, "And saw heaven open, and a certain vessel descending unto him, as it had been a great sheep knit at the four corners and let down to the earth. So he saw this big, ginormous sheet, okay, come down from the sky down to the earth, and it was knit at the four corners. Now, why is this important? Okay, because this is the first clue letting us know that this is not talking about food. It's talking about people, a specific people at that. Notice it's knit at the four corners. Why? Because Israel is scattered into the four corners of the earth. That's what this is about, okay? But we're going to get even more clarity as we read further, okay? Let's continue. So this is verse 12, and it reads, wherein were all manner of four-footed beasts of the earth, and wild beasts, and creeping things, and fowls of the air. Okay, so in Christianity, they will argue with me and say, well, this is dealing with animals. No, sir, or no, madam. This is not talking about food. It's not talking about animals, okay? In the Bible, you have people who were referred to as these things, okay? I'll give you an example, okay? When you go back to the very beginning of the Bible, okay, when it talks about the serpent, right? It said that the serpent was more subtle or subtle than any beast of the field. Now, here's the problem with that. It says that the serpent was more subtle or subtle than any beast of the field. But wait a minute. A serpent is not a beast. A serpent is a reptile. Okay? So why is it being compared to a beast? Why? Because those beasts in that particular verse were talking about people. The same way the serpent wasn't an actual serpent. Okay? It was a specific group of people. Okay? But that's a whole nother video for another day. But the point being is that people oftentimes in the Bible are referred to as these things, as beasts, wild beasts, fowls, and so forth and so on. Okay, that's what this is talking about. But anyway, continuing on, verse 13, and it reads, and there came a voice to him, rise, Peter, kill and eat. So in verse 13, while Peter is in this trance, he hears a voice that's commanding him to eat. But remember in verse 12, he saw all manner of four-footed beasts and wild beasts and creeping things and fowls, right? All manner, meaning what? Including those animals that's unclean, right? So this is where people get confused and they actually think that this is talking about food. But I'm going to show you that it's not. It's actually talking about people when you read in context. Okay? So this is verse 14, and it reads, but Peter said, not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. Pause. Why is this important? This is important because what did we say earlier? We said earlier that within Christianity, they use Mark chapter 7 to try and justify eating anything that you want, right? They use that. But we also read in Mark chapter 7, that very same chapter, when the disciples were actually there. And Yahushua explained everything that he meant concerning that parable, right? So here later, in the book of Acts, which comes after Mark chapter 7, Peter still has the mind frame of not eating anything that's unclean. So what does that tell us? That Mark chapter 7 had nothing to do with unclean foods, or else Peter would not still have this mentality. Okay, right now we could really say checkmate. Okay, but we're gonna continue on and further prove this point. Okay, that's why I said I was gonna kill two birds with one stone. I'm gonna deal with both passages in Mark chapter 7 and Acts chapter 10. Okay, so now let's move forward and pick back up where we left off at in Acts chapter 10. And we're going to start right here at verse 15. And it reads, "And the voice spake unto him again the second time, What God hath cleansed, that call not thou common." Now verse 16. "This was done thrice, and the vessel was received up again into heaven." So this was done thrice, meaning 3 times. They went back and forth. Him telling Peter to eat and Peter saying no, refusing to eat anything that's common or unclean. This was done 3 times. Now keep that in mind. It was done 3 times. That's very important, okay, as to understanding what this whole parable is actually about, what this vision is about, okay? So let's jump up to verse 5 and get the context about what's actually going on. This is verse 5, and it reads, "And now send men to Joppa, and call for one Simon, whose surname is Peter." So this is a conversation that's being had between Cornelius and an angel. Okay, Cornelius, being a centurion. Okay, he was, which means that he was the captain of 100 of the Italian band or the Roman army. Okay, and people like to say that he was a Gentile of the other nations. No, he was an Israelite. Okay, an Israelite foreigner or an Israelite who lived like a Gentile, so to speak. Okay, and he got this message from an angel to send men to Joppa to inquire about Peter. Okay, so that's what's going on thus far, okay, to give you a rundown. All right, so moving on, this is verse 6, and it reads, "He lodgeth with one Simon, a tanner, whose house is by the seaside. He shall tell thee what thou oughtest to do." So the angel is telling him that Peter is at the house of Simon, a tanner, right now, and his house is by the seaside. So now the angel is telling him that Peter is going to give Cornelius instructions on what he needs to do. Okay, so now pay very close attention to verse 7, and it reads, "And when the angel which spake unto Cornelius departed, he called 2 of his household servants." Cornelius called 2 of his household servants, "and a devout soldier of them that waited on him continually." Okay, so let's count, shall we? Cornelius sent 2 of his household servants and a soldier to go inquire about Peter. That's 3 men, right or wrong. Okay, and remember, in this vision that Peter got, he went back and forth with this voice how many times? 3 times. And now 3 men are going to try and meet up with Peter. Is that a coincidence? No. Because again, the vision that Peter got was not about animals or food. It was about people. Okay, and we're going to continue reading and we're going to further prove that. Okay, so now let's jump down to verse 17 and pick back up with Peter's vision. Okay, now that we have some context as concerning what's going on. Okay, so this is verse 17, and it reads, "Now, while Peter doubted in himself what this vision which he had seen should mean, behold, the men which were sent from Cornelius had made inquiry for Simon's house and stood before the gate. Okay, so now they're there at this house that we read about where Peter was staying at. And now they're inquiring about Peter. These 3 men, remember? Okay, now this is verse 18, and it reads, and called and asked whether Simon, which was surnamed Peter, were lodged there. Okay, because remember, the angel told Cornelius that this is where Peter was staying at. Okay, let's continue. This is verse 19, and it reads, while Peter thought on the vision, the Spirit said unto him, behold, 3 men seek thee. Allow me to repeat the last part. It says, 3 men seek thee. This is what the Spirit told Peter, okay? While he was thinking about the vision, the Spirit told Peter, behold, 3 men seek thee. Why am I stressing that? Okay, because remember, Peter went back and forth with the voice 3 times about that vision, and he refused to eat the unclean beast 3 times. Okay, and now these 3 men are there looking for Peter. That's what the vision was about. It wasn't about food. It was about people. Okay, let's continue. Verse 20. Arise therefore and get thee down and go with them, doubting nothing. Why is he saying that? Because Peter doubted within himself concerning the vision, right? So now that he understands what the vision is about, it's about these 3 men. It says, doubting nothing, for I sent them. That's what the vision was about. Okay? Not food. It was about people. Okay? So like I said before, right now, we could really say checkmate. But if it's still not clear enough for anybody, okay, let's jump to verse 28 and let's really drive the point home. Okay, so jumping down, this is verse 28, and it reads, and he said unto them, this is Peter speaking, and he said unto them, ye know how that it is an unlawful thing for a man that is a Jew to keep company or come unto one of another nation. But God hath showed me that I should not call any man common or unclean. Pause. Now, within Christianity, they will tell you that Acts chapter 10, that vision that Peter got, is about food, letting us know that we can eat whatever we want to eat. But wait a minute. You look at the end of verse 28, it says, but God hath showed me that I should not call any man common or unclean. Like I said, this is about people. That vision that Peter got was about people. It had nothing to do with food. But yet, in Christianity, they will use that vision to try and justify eating whatever they want to eat. That is complete madness. Okay, let's go back up towards the beginning of the verse. It says what? Ye know how that it is an unlawful thing for a man that is a Jew to keep company or come unto one of another nation. Now, what is that talking about? Okay. The word Jew is simply short for Judah, which is in reference to the southern kingdom of Israel. Remember, if you don't know the history, after the death of King Solomon, the nation of Israel split into 2 separate kingdoms. Okay, it was the southern kingdom of Israel and the northern kingdom of Israel. Okay, or rather, the southern kingdom of Judah and the northern kingdom of Israel. Okay, so that's what this is going into, because here again, the southern kingdom, the Jews, they remained in the land, and for a time they continued under the customs of our forefathers, okay, under, keeping the law, statutes, and commandments, right? But then you had the other Israelites that scattered, okay? They wasn't able to come up under the law, statutes, and commandments that was given to our forefathers, okay? They lived like the other nations, hence they're referred to as beast, okay? Wild beast in this vision, right? That's what this is going into, okay? They are the ones of another nation, okay? Because as you're going to see, when the nation of Israel split, not only were they separated into two different kingdoms, they started to become as two different nations. They were looked at as two different nations of people as well. And we're going to go into that, okay? But the end of the verse says what? But God hath showed me that I should not call any man common or unclean. Of course, referring to whom? The mainly who? The northern kingdom of Israel, okay? Or the scattered Israelites, right? That's what this is going into. Verse 28 sums up the whole vision that Peter was given, okay? It had nothing to do with unclean foods, okay? It's not giving you permission to eat whatever you want to eat, okay? So again, the end of the verse says, but God hath showed me that I should not call any man common or unclean. Again, letting us know that the vision that Peter was given had nothing to do with unclean foods. It was not giving us permission to eat whatever we want to eat. Okay? So now we have to deal with the part where it says one of another nation. Okay? We have to deal with that, because here again, within Christianity, they'll look at that part and say, that's talking about, the non-Israelite nations. Okay. But as I said before, when the children of Israel, when there was that split after King Solomon's death, okay, the southern kingdom of Judah and the northern kingdom of Israel, they started looking at one another as two separate nations of people. Okay, that's what this is talking about. Okay, it's not dealing with non-Israelite nations. Okay, this whole thing is about Israelites only. Okay, now let's prove that. Okay, this is the book of Ezekiel, chapter 37, starting at verse 21. Okay, this is a future prophecy about the children of Israel, okay, dealing with the split within the children of Israel. And it reads, and say unto them, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I will take the children of Israel from among the heathen whither they be gone, and will gather them on every side and bring them into their own land. Again, because you had some of the children of Israel that's scattered among the heathen. That's why in Peter's vision, these Israelites were referred to as beast, wild beast, fowls, creeping things. They were referred to as that because they're scattered amongst the heathen, and they've taken on the customs of those heathen that they live amongst. Okay, that's what that vision was going into. Okay, let's look at verse 22, and it reads, and I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be king to them all. Now watch closely. And they shall be no more two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms anymore at all. Okay, so as we see in this prophecy in Ezekiel 37, it tells us clearly that the children of Israel, they were split and became as two separate nations. But here in the near future, and it's happening right now, the children of Israel are becoming one nation again. Okay? The so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, we are coming into the knowledge, and we have found out that we are the children of Israel, and we are coming together. But this is really going to be fulfilled in the kingdom of Christ. And Christ's kingdom is really when this prophecy is going to be fulfilled completely. Okay? But anyway, I believe this is actually a good place to bring this lesson to an end. Okay? I believe I hit on the most important points concerning those two passages. Remember, we went over Mark chapter 7 and Acts chapter 10 concerning, the verses that's pretty much used to try and justify, eating whatever you want to eat. And, we went over the verses, gave the correct understanding, proving that, that's a false doctrine. You cannot eat whatever you want. Okay. The dietary laws are still in play. Okay. You still have to abide by the dietary laws. Okay. But anyway, of course, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rachakwadash. I want to thank all of you brothers and sisters for tuning in. And until next time, Shalom, family.